Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, welcome to this video. My name is Solomon Thomas. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I'm about to graduate with my master's in psychology, and I have the goal of becoming a clinical psychologist one day. So as I'm studying and preparing, I'm making these YouTube videos to practice clarifying my thoughts on these different ideas that I come across, and I also hope that some of these concepts and paradigms can be helpful to anyone who's listening. So for this video, I wanted to talk about navigating transitions. This is an idea that my wife gave me, and so it was on my mind this morning, so I thought I'd give it a shot. When it comes to how to properly navigate transitions, whether this is in your career, whether this is something drastic like you've lost a loved one, or maybe you've broken up with someone that you've been with for 10 years, it can definitely be difficult. And there were three tips that came to my mind when I asked myself what would be an optimal way or a proper way to navigate a transition so that the least amount of, say, psychological and emotional damage can be done. The first piece of advice would be to conceptualize a transition as if there's both positive and negative aspects that potentially can occur. I'll list out the tips and then I'll go through each of them. The second one would be voluntarily confront the change or the novelty or the transition compared to, say, allowing it to impose itself on you against your will and forcefully. And then the third tip would be to establish good goals prior to the transition coming up. And this is assuming that you know that you're about to go through a transition. Or you could also think of it as find those behaviors and habits that can be a source of stability in your life amidst the chaos and the change. So those are the three tips. Going back to the first one, change, novelty, anomalies, things that occur that were unexpected in our lives, they can be both good and bad, or they can be both good or bad. And this kind of comes from a metaphysical perspective on reality that starts with order and chaos. There's this philosopher named Robert Pirsig that inspired many of these ideas that I'm about to tell you about. Order in our life is stability, it's predictable, it's protective, but it can be boring and it can stifle creativity and it can hinder our ability to grow because growth comes from being pushed to change or voluntarily accepting change and adapting yourself to novel circumstances. So there's positive and negative aspects to order. There's also positive and negative aspects to chaos. One of them, as I just said, is it's change that brings forth growth and adaptation. But if there's too much change, then you're overly anxious, you're frustrated, you're filled with too much negative emotion, and ultimately, too much change can lead to a lot of suffering and perhaps even death. And so there are positive and negative aspects to change. I think it's helpful to understand that because some of us can have this pattern of thinking that change is only bad. And there's an argument to be made there, particularly when you understand the negative aspects of change and you understand the positive aspects of order, where you like your peace, you like your stability in your relationship, in your job, in your home, in your hobbies, in your business. You don't want things to change because things are good enough right now from your perspective. And so it's understandable that there's an aversion to change, but if you keep in mind that there's also a negative aspect to order and there's also a positive aspect to change, then that to a degree can reframe how you perceive the situation that you're going through. Whether, again, it's a transition in your family, maybe you're about to get married, maybe you're about to have a child. It's not only bad, although there is a potential for something negative to occur. So I think it's helpful to keep in mind that change can be both good and bad. And a big part of your experience with your transition is going to be your attitude. And so this goes to the second tip. The second tip is to voluntarily confront the transition or the change rather than being passive and allowing it to happen to you. I mentioned this experiment in a previous video where if you take two rats and you have them run in this treadmill contraption where rat A can run voluntarily, it's free to run on its own, but every time rat A decides to run, rat B's treadmill will be forced to start to rotate, and so rat B will involuntarily run. So you have the same aerobic stimulus that applies to both rats, but the difference is that rat A is running voluntarily and rat B is running involuntarily. If you obtain physiological health markers after enabling the rats to run after a certain period of time, you'll see that rat A has healthier health markers compared to rat B. And there's a great book by Carol Dweck. It's called Mindset. And in that book, there are many other empirical studies and theoretical amalgamations of different concepts relating to how your attitude impacts the stress that you are going to be confronted with. So the second tip is to voluntarily accept that the transition is going to occur, and you can either tell yourself this or you can just watch how you perceive, say, shifting positions within a job or changing jobs completely, or you're about to get married. If you notice, perhaps from an emotional perspective, that you are begrudging what's going to happen and you're resentful, maybe you are constantly fantasizing about a scenario where the change doesn't occur, I would say that those indications are markers of an involuntary / lack of willingness to confront the transition compared to the mindset of this is going to happen. How can I prepare from a behavioral, from a perceptual, from an emotional standpoint to be the best person that I could be as I am navigating this transition? So the second, why can't I say that word? Transition. So the second tip is to voluntarily confront the change or the novelty that you're about to encounter. And this is very general information because it's easy to say that, but what happens when you lose a loved one, or even if if you lose a pet, there are things that inevitably will occur. One of those things is change. That while you're in the moment, it can be very difficult to accept. It can be difficult to allow yourself to find some sort of comfort or even find some sort of hope that things will be better. At the same time, there are many examples of human beings going through the worst of circumstances, and even while in the height of the atrocity or the catastrophe, being able to maintain some sort of discipline or some sort of well-developed personality that is admirable. I have just two stories came to my mind. One is my own mother. She lost her husband, my dad, when I was 11 in 2006. And some of her first behaviors and thoughts when she found out that he was dead was her care for her children. That was like what was on her mind. And so it was interesting to watch her push outside of herself when she had every excuse to crumble and to let the change, just to put it mildly, consume her. It's completely justifiable and understandable, but there was something about my mother that when the change occurred, she, while she didn't say this exactly, embodied the notion of, okay, this happened. My priorities are to take care of my two boys. And I need to start thinking about what it is that they need and how I need to conduct myself to make sure that they still have a good life. So that's one example. And then another example comes from the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. There are many stories in that book of Dr. Frankl's experience in the different concentration camps during World War II in Germany, where if I remember correctly, there were prisoners, who would give food to other people, or who would give their shoes to someone who they believed was more in need, even though they were all starving and they were all working in the freezing cold and they were all tired and they were all scared that they were going to die. They didn't know where their loved ones were. They thought their families were already dead. But even in those worst of circumstances, of transitions, as we could call them, there is this ability to maintain yourself. I'm going to paraphrase a quote from Dr. Frankl, and it's something like, the only thing that other people can't take from a man is his ability to choose his own attitude. And if we accept the idea that your attitude plays a role in your experience of reality, we can then ask ourselves, well, what is the optimal attitude to embody when going through a transition? And I think one part of that attitude is associated with the ability to voluntarily adopt and confront the transition, rather than being in a position of, let's say, prey mindset, where you're afraid and you tell yourself that you're not capable of dealing with this anomaly. Now, the third and final tip would just be to counteract too much change while you're going through the transition with a pattern of behavior that is predicated on routine, that's predicated on predictability, and that's predicated on habits. So all of that to say, when you're moving to a new state, or you're about to graduate from graduate school, and now your daily and weekly activities are going to change, it is useful to plan out certain regular modes of behavior that you can do on a day-to-day basis that can be a source of stability and regularity amidst all of the change that's manifesting in your life. And so for me, I'm about to graduate from my master's program, and I've already lined up a job where I've been working for a few months as a behavior technician, working with kids with autism. I also have my goals, my daily habits of reading and writing, and I have these things where I was in this structure of, okay, wake up, get ready to go to school, do my assignments, do my reading, go to school, and that would be that. And now I have this freeing phase of my life, ideally just for a year before I go back for a PhD. And it could be overwhelming, because part of the question that manifests when you're free of a structure, you change jobs or you leave school, is, okay, well, what do I do now? And for some people that can be overwhelming, but it can be helpful to, first of all, have a vision of your life that you are trying to bring into reality, have some notion of what kind of personality you're trying to develop, and then to develop and instantiate good habits that you can practice regardless of context and regardless of transition. And even though that can be difficult, it can be helpful, because regardless of job, regardless of partner, regardless of whether or not you're in school, you can always do things like go to a coffee shop and read for an hour, or go to the gym, or go run for an hour, or write for 30 minutes. And once you build these core habits that are somewhat context independent, that can serve as a type of order that can fill up your day and counteract the experience of change that might become too chaotic as you're switching through different areas of your life. So, to recap, change can be difficult. I think one first step for making change easier is to understand that it doesn't have to be only a negative thing, that just as with order, there's positive and negative elements. With chaos, which is novelty and change, there are also positive and negative elements. Part of the experience of those positive and negative elements is your attitude. And I would say that one aspect of a good attitude that can enable a more meaningful transition, it would be an attitude characterized by voluntary confrontation with the change rather than involuntary prey like manifestations. And then finally, it can be helpful to have a routine and to have a set of habits that one can fall back on if things are getting a little too chaotic in terms of changing jobs or changing careers, or even when you're breaking up with a partner and you're curious about what to do with your life now that maybe certain aspects of what you thought of as your identity are gone. It can be helpful to fall back on a set of habits that are in your control and that you know are helping you move towards a better direction, even if you don't have a fully high resolution understanding of what that better vision is. So I hope that some of these ideas can be helpful to some of you, and I appreciate your attention, and I'll see you in the next video.